Armor comes in all shapes and sizes, but who has the best legendary quest armor in the game? Today we're going to count down the top 10 to find out who really has the freshest drip in Warhammer 3. Coming in at 10th place we have the Shield of Eons. This one is real simple, with only 2 effects and an ability. We all know Gazrak is a meaty lad, so giving him even more armor and some fire resistance is really just a drop in the bucket of his insane toughness. The real power, as usual, lies in the ability. It is a massive boost to armor as well as expert charge defense for all allied units in the fairly large radius for 23 seconds. So that's 60 armor to himself, as well as what will likely be some already incredibly tough front lines troops, making them into an impenetrable wall for a short time. Doesn't matter if enemies have cav, monsters, infantry, or anything in between, with these massive buffs, they'll struggle to get through your troops without being at least slow to a crawl. Now, it's not going to get any higher, since when it really comes down to it, the item is pretty basic. We're looking at a tiny collection of effects, and while the ability is good, the other two are just sort of there for the ride, and I can't justify putting it anywhere higher. Coming in 9th place, we have the Armor of Gazrak. Returning to Zatan from the last items video, because this guy really has some great picks. The Armor of Gazrak isn't quite as strong as the Obsidian Axe, but it's still a seriously strong item in its own right. The basic effects are pretty top notch for a lord that's already pretty damn tough, but a little bit vulnerable on such a large mount. The extra armor and defense will not be wasted on this lad, and you'll easily get value out of them, making him much tougher. Like most items, the power is in the ability, and here we see he can gain up to 30% damage resistance based on how much damage he's already taken. So as the battle goes on and he takes more damage, he's only going to get harder to kill, while most other units will go the opposite way. Add that 30% ward save to the defense and resistance as he already has, and he can be pretty impossible to take out without an overwhelming amount of damage. Now, this item isn't going any higher, since you need your lord to take a lot of hits to get full value out of it, meaning most of the time you want to actually avoid letting it come fully online. That being said, it's still a great item, and for those times when he does take the damage, you'll be glad he's only getting tankier the lower his HP falls. Next up we have the Bloodforged Armor. In quite a unique change, the power of this item is actually in the effects a lot more than the ability. As much fun as the low cooldown explosion is for causing some chaos and creating some space, it hardly makes much of an impact outside of that minimal damage. The other effects, however, are pretty top notch, for Grimgor in particular. Going from worst to best, enemy hero success chance while a little weak is still nice for keeping your army safe from interference. Wound recovery time will be useful on the off chance that someone manages to take out Grimgor for getting him back in action that much faster. More armor is never a bad thing for reducing all damage that makes it through his defenses, which are also getting a buff, and let's be honest, his stats are hardly weak to begin with. And finally, the 15% ward save, meaning a fair bit of damage that comes his way and makes it through any of his many layers of defense, will just be ignored with no real counterplay. Grimgor is a beast in combat from the get-go. With this item, he's much harder to kill, so can get a ton more value and take a lot less hits whilst doing it. I'm not placing it any higher, since when it comes down to it, these effects are very selfish and only really serve Grimgor to make him even more powerful. He's a great fighter and can carry battles, but it's just not enough to carry him to the top. Next we have Azhag's Ard Armor. Azhag finding himself back on the list too, and this item is pretty similar to his weapon, but it has one difference that I believe makes it just a little bit worse. Before that though, we have the passive effects, and they're pretty damn good too. It's pretty much just toughness increases across the board, with defense, armor, physical resistance, and ward save all getting a bonus. All this adds up fast and makes him deceptively tough even on the large-sized mount. Now, he's not the tankiest you can be as a lord, but he's pretty hard to take out for what he is, so that deserves some credit. The keen-eyed of you may realise that these are almost the same buffs that Grimgor gets, and while Azhag technically gets a large increase to toughness, he's still not as tanky as Grimgor since his baseline is much higher and his size is much smaller. So why is Azhag's armor higher up? Well, it really comes down to the ability. Similar to these slashers, we're looking at buffs to units nearby to Azhag in combat, but there's one major difference. This one is an active ability with a fairly sizable cooldown, so you're going to have to choose when to use it rather than just tossing him into combat and reaping the rewards. Now, the effects are massive, so it's fair enough it's an active, and it also lasts a decent chunk of time anyway. It just means you're going to need to select when and where to drop these effects, and think about positioning and timing just a little bit more. Once lines are clashed and high melee damage is headed towards your troops, give it a pop and reap the rewards. I choose to put this above Grimgor since it's helping his army as well as himself, so even if he gets too focused and can't get tons of value on his own, other units in his army will still be able to do well with the buffs alone. Coming in 6th place we have Thorric's Rune Armor. If you can rely on anyone to be tough, it's the dwarves, and Thorric is no different. With this item, he has a staggering amount of armor, so much so that without armor piercing, I think he'd have an easier time taking down a mountain. The added resistances are decent additions to make him tougher versus other forms of damage, especially with the fire-focused Chaos Dwarves hitting the scene recently and tearing things up. The ability basically just spreads some of that love with nearby units. Granted, it's not quite as much resistance and there's nothing for spells, but he still is making what will likely be an already stupidly tough front line even tougher. Dwarf Lords are all tough frontlines fighters, and Thorric is no different. Add on his already fat stack of runic-based buffs, and his frontline is going to be stupidly hard to get rid of and give the rest of the army plenty of time to wipe out whatever it is you find yourself up against. He's just a buff machine, and he's so high up the list since these are passive buffs that are active constantly, so anytime he's close to his units, he'll be making them better. Add on the Singer with the Dwarf Wall of Steel playstyle, and it's a very strong item for sure. Coming in 5th place, we have the War Crown of Sapphire. This is one of the more unique items on the list, since the changes it brings are honestly pretty mid when looked at in a vacuum. It's when you get the full context of who has the item and what they can do with it that it becomes far stronger. Weakest stuff out the way first. More capacity and recruit rank for mages is cool and saves you some time and building space. Recruiting mages in all provinces does more of the same and would be useful in the late game were it not for the fact that building an army requires you to have recruitment buildings, so you'll likely be able to get mages in those areas anyway. The ward save is nice, 10% flat damage reduction on a lord who never really gets too tough, so he'll take all the help he can get. And of course, the literally crowning effect of this item is the spell cooldown reduction. 30% is pretty massive and is the difference between casting spells every 30 seconds and being able to spam constantly, and with some of the spells tech list has access to, you can get a ton of value from the near constant casting. He has his mixed lore so he can be buffing, debuffing or dealing damage pretty much all the time. The one thing stopping me from topping the list is that I don't love this spellbook all that much. Now it's not terrible, don't get me wrong, but there's no massive damage spell like a Pit of Shades, so the output of it is a little bit limited in that perspective. Buffing all the time is nice, but why do that when you can literally drop bombs onto the enemy? Coming in 4th place, just missing out on the podium, we have the Armour of Templehof. The vampire counts are back, but not quite in the same numbers they were for the weapons video. Just managed today with the Armour of Templehof. It's got a lot of the usual suspects you'd expect from armour with added toughness in nearly every area you can. Add on some hero action defense and wound recovery time, and you have an item pretty packed with features, and we haven't even got to the ability. It is of course more regeneration, but this time it's a one-use ability, healing just over a quarter of maximum HP over 33 seconds. It's not quite as overpowered as the passive healing some of the weapons were given, but it's another tool in Manny's arsenal to keep him alive alongside his spells, the hunger passive, and any auras he has in his army. It is a nice boost over a short period of time, so when you need to get a quick HP boost and don't have the wins to spare, it can come in clutch to get him back in fighting shape in a jiffy. Honestly, the one thing holding this back is the fact that it's just a single use. I get it's a huge heal, but using it only one time means once it's gone, and there are simpler items that offer a better deal. Speaking of which, the Armour of Kaldor breaking into 3rd place. 2 high elves actually in this list, and Imric has an absolute banger. To start off with, the extra buffs it's bringing to the army of cutting vigor consumption by a third means his army is going to be fighting at peak performance for much longer than usual, and for the high elves, that is extra useful. The leadership aura effect is going to be another nice addition and means allied units close to him will stick around for a very long time. The toughness buffs he gets aren't huge, but he's already one tanky lad so it can add up quick and make him exceptionally difficult to take out. And of course we have the ability, and it's a doozy. The vigor per second is nice to recover basically all Zenji, since minus 10% per second for 20 seconds is minus 200%. Not sure if I'm misreading how that works since it seems like a little bit stupid, but either way it'll keep him fighting fit for a very long time. The decreased cooldowns are nice, but he's not a caster, so hardly a game changer. The regen is of course where it gets downright broken. 1.6% of max HP per second for 20 seconds is 32% of max, or just under 1/3 of his entire HP bar. And what's that? He can use it 3 times? Granted, the 180 second cooldown means he'll almost certainly never get even 2 uses out of it in your average Warhammer battle, but if by some miracle it goes that long, you'll be able to get him with almost a full second HP bar, which is pretty wacky. The one downside is he can't move while it's active, and 20 seconds of standing still with a hitbox like his on a dragon, so just make sure you pull him out to safety before popping it to keep him safe. So yes, it is harder to use in the Armour of Templehof, but the overall healing you can get here if you theoretically get the full effects in one battle is massive, so I don't really have any choice but to place it higher. Now it's not quite the best healing since it does have a cooldown. Coming in 2nd place we have the Helm of the Kraken. Let's not beat around the bush here, the basic effects of this item are pretty basic. 15 armor is a drop in the bucket for Loki, and causing terror, while a nice touch, isn't really going to change how he plays. The ability, however, takes him to the next level. 10 extra defense is great, especially once he's on a mount, keeping him safe from taking too much damage from all directions. But of course the star of the show is the regeneration. It will never not be extremely strong, and while this is only active whilst he's in melee, you can still get insane healing to either keep him at full HP, or get him topped up by sending him to fight against some chaff. No matter the situation, extra health is an amazing addition to any lord, and this is no different. And healing with no cooldown just means enemies are constantly fighting an uphill battle to take out your lord, since every moment they're getting more and more HP and require constant pressure to take out completely. Like I said, it's only active when he's fighting, so it isn't like you can just stand AFK and get HP back. That'd be absurd. Speaking of which, the Auric Armor coming in first place. The central servant of Slaanesh had to break into a list sooner or later, and this armor is doing the trick. It, funnily enough, only offers 6 armor, but Slaanesh isn't exactly known for covering up. The Slaanesh Authority is nice for buffing units in the army, and immunity to all contact effects is pretty damn wacky, but the last 2 effects really skyrocket this bad boy. Increasing the healing cap by a massive 50%, combined with passive healing at all times that he's not running away, is pretty bonkers. Yes, the healing is pretty slow, but it is constant, so it can be fighting, resting, walking, sleeping, performing karaoke, an elaborate dance routine, and he'll be healing the entire time for any damage he's taken. Combine that with an increase to the healing cap, and enemies are going to have to put a ton of damage onto Siggy to take him down. So you can now send him in to tear enemies to pieces, knowing that not only will he never die with his perfect vigor, but he'll also very likely never die with ungodly amounts of regeneration. I mean, it's constant regen, no matter what he's up to. What more could you ask for? It doesn't matter what he's doing, he's healing, so it's going to be a nightmare to take out with a constant focus on him. If it was a one-man army, it wouldn't be so bad, but enemies will have the rest of the army to worry about, meaning most of the time, he's going to be able to slip out of combat for a top-up, no problem, before coming back for more, until he's won out the passive healing cap he has, or more likely, you won the battle. Regen is king as far as effects go, and this one doesn't really have any downsides for a whole lot of upsides, so it's a no-brainer. And that's our list. Did I miss any items you thought should have made it? Let me know in the comments down below. Like, subscribe, and if you want to know what the best weapons in Warhammer 3 are, then check out this video to see the top 10.